The Paris Olympic Games ended with a spectacular finale, but questions remain about the treatment of Chinese athletes. Hello, I'm Einar, and this is The Heat. Over the past 2 weeks, athletes from around the world came together in a celebration of the human spirit. Records were set and broken. China had its best Olympic Games since 2008, winning a whopping 40 gold medals. But the Games were overshadowed by accusations of doping against China by the United States and Western media. For its part, China's anti-doping agency hit back, accusing the West of double standards and calling for increased testing and scrutiny of U.S. athletes. Jim Spellman reports.
In March, U.S. sprinter Arian Knighton tested positive for trenbolone, a banned steroid, but the U.S. anti-doping agency, USADA, cleared him for competition, finding he consumed contaminated meat. The positive test did not become public until June. The World Anti-Doping Agency raised doubts about the USADA investigation at the time, and in a statement this week, the China Anti-Doping Agency, known as CHINATA, wrote, quote, "We call on USADA to review the approaches and principles it has adopted in doping cases to ensure compliance with the goals of the global anti-doping system." USADA defends its investigation, but CHINATA points to a long history of U.S. athletes being allowed to compete despite positive tests, including 9-time gold medalist Carl Lewis in the 1980s and Justin Gatlin in the early 2000s. CHINATA also accuses the USADA of a, quote, double standard for casting doubt on Chinese swimmers who tested positive for a banned substance known as trimetazidine in 2021. Both CHINATA and the World Anti-Doping Agency cleared the swimmers after an extensive investigation determined contaminated food to be the source of the positive tests in this case as well. Chinese swimmers took dozens of tests leading up to the Paris Olympics. All were negative.
China should be treated with respect. Today I have no evidence to suggest that they've manipulated the process. We have a cooperation agreement with CHINATA where we test athletes together, and they have shown great, I can really tell you, this is one of the national agencies that has shown the greatest transparency.
Despite the swimmers being cleared by CHINATA and the World Anti-Doping Agency, a U.S. congressional committee is calling for an investigation into the matter.
The U.S. keeps making groundless accusations, hyping up and attacking the relevant international organization. And its purpose is to slander outstanding Chinese athletes and affect Chinese athletes' participation in the Paris Olympics. China believes the US is in no position to speak willfully on the global anti-doping governance system and China's anti-doping work.
The U.S. Anti-Doping Agency is also facing scrutiny over revelations it allowed athletes caught doping to continue competing while working undercover to report on other athletes using banned substances, something not permitted by WADA or other anti-doping agencies. Behind the controversies, some critics see larger political objectives.
Against the backdrop of China-US geopolitical rivalry, Olympic Games has been seen as another platform for some individuals in the US to smear China and contain China's rise. This is really unfortunate.
The controversies surrounding the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency are not likely to end with the closing ceremonies in Paris. Last month, the U.S. city of Salt Lake City, Utah, was awarded the 2034 Winter Olympics, but the Games could be taken back if the U.S. doesn't conform to World Anti-Doping Agency standards. Jim Spellman, CGTN, Washington.
China's 31 swimmers in Paris have been tested an average of 21 times by various anti-doping agencies since the start of this year, compared with 6 times for their American rivals. Earlier, I spoke with swimming analyst Alex Pussieldi, who was in Paris following the Games, and I started by asking him what he thinks about those numbers.
I do think World Aquatics responding to some kind of pressure for the international media, inform some international anti-doping agencies. I think the best way for World Aquatics was to provide more testing and make sure everyone is clean. That thing does not really make anybody affected to the fact like being more tested, but definitely was the way World Aquatics decide for give a better answer for the pressure.
Right, you say they came under pressure. Where did that pressure come from?
But the pressure is definitely is geopolitical pressure. Now it's definitely it's some the international media uh, supported by some international investigators. I think the journalism has a very important component of be investigative on facts, but it crossed the line when take the opinions. So I think the investigative journalism is something else good, but when you cross the line and you make your own decisions, not that great. And some international anti-dope agencies influenced by this international media decide to pressure World Aquatics, to pressure WADA, and the better answer was testing more the swimmers, testing more the Chinese team, and make sure everyone is clean.
Right, of course, this is a complex process. Now, let's talk about food contamination. It's not a rare occurrence. The World Anti-Doping Agency, known as WADA, W-A-D-A, released a statement saying, and I'll read that statement to you, it says, apart from China in particular, there have been several of these cases in the United States over the past few months alone, where highly intricate contamination scenarios were accepted. For example, the US sprinter Erriyon Knighton, who tested positive in March, was cleared to compete in Paris. We don't hear much about that in the media.
Definitely, 100%. And then also, we probably has way more other cases we do not ever hear, because the national anti-doping agencies by law, they're not mandatory to release their cases and their names, like Shinada never did on the case of the 21 swimmers. So it's basically, if you follow the anti-doping law, you are not mandatory to release this case. And what you just said, period. The international media kind of forget completely the other cases and focus only on Chinese. It's unfair.
Right now, the American Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, and the United States Justice Department opened a criminal probe into how Chinese swimmers had avoided sanctions. And the reason they can do this is because of a 2020 law that gives the US jurisdiction over doping matters anywhere in the world where US athletes are involved. And that basically means any international sporting events where the US is involved. Isn't that a huge overreach by the United States government? Is it meddling in international sports?
Listen, this Rodchenkov Act, it's pathetic. This law is ridiculous. First of all, because it crossed the line using a political influence for something else that you have no jurisdiction. So how you can punish someone if you do not investigate, you did not analyze, you do not have control of that. That does not make sense at all. And IOC already replied to this, because recently the city of Salt Lake City got rewarded to be receiving the Olympic Winter Games, and IOC was pretty much very strong on that and say, listen, you have to clean this, because we cannot give you the right to host an Olympic Games if you do not follow the international sports law. You cannot cross the line. That's one of the most important things on Olympic sports. So it's basically, in my view, this Rodchenkov law is completely off the mind. And now also people need to know they have their professional leagues do not follow the Rodchenkov law. Like, you are on the right to punish an international swimmer testing overseas, and you're not testing your basketball player, your football player, your hockey player. Come on, doesn't make sense at all.
Now, you say the Salt Lake Committee came under pressure from the IOC. Has there been any response from the United States?
that this is one of the things happened right on the first Congress we had right prior to Olympic Games, when the same day where Salt Lake City received the right to host the Winter Olympic Games, IOC was pretty much very strong on their message. Listen, you have to follow IOC rules and laws. We cannot submit our sport, our international sport, for some specific laws does not belong to the sport. And you will be able also to lose the right to host the Olympic Games. So the message was very strong, and I think fair.
Do you get the feeling that the United States is pressuring international organizations like the IOC to unfairly target and penalize those athletes from the global south?
The thing is this, I think this is geopolitical fights in battles, and I think everyone can do whatever they want since you respect the law. And the sport law is above of everything. So the pressure, what USADA or USA Swimming or even other international institutions and federations do it, it's fine. The thing is, you cannot cross the border. You cannot cross the line. For that, WADA, World Aquatics, has been, and IOC, they have been following the property procedure. And the results in the pool just rewarded the best swimmers, the ones who did the best in training. On best results, best training, get the medals.
Alex, thanks so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure.
Okay, to continue our conversation, let's bring in our panel. Here in Washington, D.C., William Jones is the former bureau chief for Executive Intelligence Review. From Beijing, Paul Dong is a sports industry observer and co-founder of EI Asia Limited. Also from Beijing, Einar Tangen is senior fellow at the Taihe Institute and chairman of Asia Narratives. Welcome to all of you to the show. Paul Dong, before we get to the allegations of doping, let's look at the end of the games. At the end of the games, all the medals have been tallied and tabulated. The United States and China got 40 gold medals apiece, but in the total number of medals, the United States was first, China was second. What do you make of China's performance at these games?
I think, once again, it has met the expectations of many Chinese sports fans, and maybe even exceeding some of them, given some of the pressure and difficulties the Chinese swimmers or many of the other athletes have faced so far in Paris. And at the same time, I think it provided the drama because it tied the gold medal count, tied the very last minute, the last second when the French female basketball player scored that very last ball right on the line of the three-pointer line, and that sealed the U.S. victory over France by only 1 point in basketball. And I think that, provides something really interesting for the entire world to watch on, such neck-to-neck rivalry between the two very powerful sporting nations. And that will only increase other, pressure on other fronts between the two countries.
Okay, William Jones, great to have you with us on the show. So let's get to these allegations of doping. Now, Western media, especially here in the United States, claim that Chinese athletes have been using performance-enhancing drugs at the Summer Olympics. That's even though Chinese athletes have been tested at far greater rates than any other team at the Olympics. And as we just heard from the World Anti-Doping Agency, China has cooperated with all testing with the greatest transparency. That's the words they used. No evidence of any doping at all. So what's behind these claims? Is it just a case of the Americans being sore losers?
Well, this could be a matter of the competition within the Olympic Committee of the various countries, but I think there's more to it, given the degree of tensions between the United States and China, where there's an all-of-government operation in order to try and diminish the role of China internationally. The biggest scandal here, of course, was also what came up after these accusations on the Chinese swimmers was the fact that the U.S. had actually taken their own swimmers who had been violating the doping laws, put them back into operation in order to get dirt on other countries' athletes. This is just absolutely astounding. And whenever you see the U.S. Congress and the FBI getting involved in a matter of Olympic sports, you have to be very suspicious that there are other things going on here. And the question would be, of course, why would they be interested in what's happening at the Olympics? Well, China is moving forward in many fields. This year, of course, in the swimming contest, which is usually the U.S. Has the high road here. They won a lot of gold medals. And this adds to prestige. You want to talk about soft power. All of this are now targets by the U.S. government in the overall China initiative, which is still ongoing here. And I think, unfortunately, given the fact that some of the great performances at the Olympics, this issue has really tainted the Olympics as an institution, and hopefully it can get cleared up. But it's all geopolitics.
Einar Tangen, the United States is threatening to revoke or reduce funding for the World Anti-Doping Agency because of what they see as a lack of sanctions against Chinese athletes, in this case Chinese swimmers, even though those swimmers, as we pointed out, were cleared of all the tests. None of the tests came up positive. They were all negative. So what do you make of these U.S. threats?
Well, it's continuing pattern. I would echo the last contributor, and that this was just an attempt to cast China as cheaters. Unfortunately, for the U.S. and Washington, it completely backfired because in the midst of these allegations, it became very clear that the U.S. ADA was giving special treatment, engaging in unethical practices that are not allowed by the Doping Association. I mean, and you also have to consider another fact. 60% of those American athletes that apply to use, whether it's they say they're asthmatic or they have ADA or whatever, performance-enhancing drugs, 60% are approved. Only around 10% are approved in China. You know, I don't know, that statistics seems wildly out of sync. And, you know, one of the issues is the ADA simply, the U.S. ADA simply using sports as another geopolitical wedge against China, in essence, cheating on their behalf, and then to deflect attention, trying to accuse others of doing exactly what they're doing without any proof.
William, we've been talking about U.S. legal overreach. You know, as I pointed out earlier on, there is a law in the U.S. statute books which gives the United States law enforcement authorities, in this case the FBI as well as the Department of Justice, gives it jurisdiction over any country and any athlete where U.S. athletes are participating. The International Olympic Committee has vigorously opposed this law and, in fact, is even threatening to withdraw the rights to hold the Winter Games if the United States continues to try and apply this law to implement it in international sporting events. But what is the U.S. goal with this law?
Well, it seems to me that it reflects what the U.S. is doing otherwise, that they feel the United States still feels that it has what I would call imperial overreach powers in determining the fate of mankind, and is now reflected in the issue of sports. And the reason is coming to the fore at the present moment is that the United States, the rise of China has proven to the United States really has a competitor on many different fields. Sports is one of them, of course. And the fact that whatever China does, because the United States has unresolved problems within its own environs, which has not been able to resolve, any moves forward by China in the area of technology, in the area of science, in the area of mathematics, in the area of sports, is considered a threat to what I would call the role of the United States as the great hegemon. And therefore, this has become a major issue. We see that in all fields of operation. And therefore, the United States law is now being imposed on the world as a whole. And I think there's going to be a major reaction of that. And I think we have a reaction within the Olympics already, because this was originally, the formation of the Olympics was originally developed in order to bring countries together out of the diversity, out of the rivalry, out of the conflicts that they had in the political realm, to give recognition to achievements in physical exercises in physical sports. And that has been undermined totally by this idea that the United States really has the long arm of U.S. law, can reach far beyond the environs of the United States. And I think that's going to have serious repercussions globally, because I don't think people are willing to accept that.
William, there have also been enormous inconsistencies in the way these cases have been reported, especially in the media. I mean, as we pointed out earlier in the show, there have been many stories in the Western media about Chinese swimmers. There have not been many cases about the positive tests with American or Western swimmers. I mean, there's one case here, Arian Knighton. He tested positive for an anabolic steroid and was cleared to compete in Paris after he claimed it came from contaminated meat that he'd consumed. There was also another case which involved a British taekwondo fighter, Jada Jones. She flat out refused to take a test, and that was a surprise test which the agency sometimes conduct, but she refused to take that test. She was still allowed to take part in the Paris Games. How is that possible?
Well, unfortunately, you have the American media, which has the rule, it seems, go along to get along. That is, when a narrative comes out from the U.S. government, you try and follow suit and follow up on that if there's something negative. And obviously, the administration doesn't want this aired too much. Then you're quiet on that. That wasn't always the case in the U.S. Media years ago. There was a free press. Today, it is very much less free, especially given the tensions between China and the United States. And with the United States declaring China a rival, then the media also feels that they have to play along in this so-called rivalry. And this is really a destruction of the free press itself, but it's also a destruction of finding truth, which really the press is assigned to do. But in this case, they'll look for the truths that are politically convenient, that are politically correct, and therefore you have this dual structure where they report problems for other nations, especially those who are considered so-called rivals, and they try and ignore or to color differently problems within their own ranks. And that's unfortunately the case that we have here in the United States today, which has gone downhill over the last few decades in that respect.
Einar, the next Summer Olympics will be held in the United States, in Los Angeles. That'll be 2028. And then, of course, there's the Winter Olympics, which will take place in 2034. I mean, with these games taking place, both of them in the United States, is there a fear that the U.S. will again target Chinese athletes?
Well, there should be a fear. I mean, it's quite clear that this is a geopolitical game as opposed to anything to do with Olympics or sports or the spirit of competition. This is win at any cost. I do want to add a few things from a legal perspective. First off, any broadcast in the United States could subject somebody to $1 million of fine or 10 years in prison under the Roscoff Act. Also, any sponsors who sponsor an event could be subject to those fines. I do not agree with the assumption that, or the assertion that testing Chinese swimmers at 3 times the rate of other swimmers is acceptable. Yes, they were cleared, but Chinese athletes should not be considered second-class citizens. If everyone is tested, they should be tested the same. There's no sense in saying that Chinese athletes have to be tested more because why? You're afraid that they're cheating? I think that is outrageous.
And that's where we have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for being with us. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C.